200 fighter jets, 500 targets, one man. At sunrise Tehran time, Israel launched the largest military strike in its entire history. Not its largest strike against Iran, its largest strike against any country, ever. And the man at the center of it all, the one man who held Iran's nuclear program in his hands, who funded the missiles, the proxy armies, the terror networks, is reportedly dead. Iran says he's fine. American intelligence says otherwise. Satellite images don't lie. But here is the part the news networks are not telling you. This was predicted not by a government analyst, not by a military strategist, by a book written 2,600 years ago. And once you see what that book says about this exact moment, you will never read the headlines the same way again. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more awe-inspiring stories of faith, survival, and miracles. Let me tell you exactly what happened, because the scale of this operation is unlike anything the world has seen from Israel, ever. This morning, around sunrise Tehran time, the skies over Iran changed. Israel launched approximately 200 fighter jets into Iranian airspace in coordinated waves. Now, stop and think about that number for a moment. The entire Israeli Air Force has roughly 340 combat aircraft. That means Israel committed nearly 60% of its total air power to a single operation on a single day. That is not a strike. That is not a raid. That is a nation putting everything on the table. And while those 200 jets were deep inside enemy territory, Israel's own skies were more exposed than at any point since the Yom Kippur War. They knew that. They did it anyway. That decision alone tells you something. You do not risk your own country's safety unless you believe, with absolute certainty, that not striking is more dangerous than striking. Now here is where it gets staggering. Those 200 jets hit over 500 separate targets. Not over a week, not over a month-long campaign. In a single day, 200 jets, 500 targets, sunrise to sunset. Let that land. The logistics alone are almost impossible to comprehend. Aerial refueling over hostile territory, real-time target coordination across multiple provinces, electronic warfare aircraft jamming Iranian radar, creating corridors of silence through which Israeli jets flew undetected. Surface-to-air missile batteries were hit in the opening minutes. Iranian air defense communication links were severed before most Iranians woke up. This was not improvised. This was planned, rehearsed, executed with a precision that stunned analysts worldwide. Now, let me walk you through what they actually hit, because the targets tell you exactly what Israel was trying to accomplish. The first category, leadership compounds. The fortified residence of the supreme leader in Tehran, not on the outskirts of the city, inside the capital. A compound built specifically to survive this kind of attack. Satellite imagery, taken within hours, showed catastrophic damage. Smoke rising from collapsed structures, rubble where hardened walls had stood for decades. And Khamenei was not the only target. Senior IRGC commanders, President Masoud Pezeshkian, defense officials, intelligence chiefs, the entire upper tier of Iran's leadership on one target list. This was not a strike designed to send a message. And this was a strike designed to remove the people who receive messages. The second category, IRGC military facilities, bases across multiple provinces, command centers, training facilities, communications hubs, the nerve system of the regime, targeted node by node. The third category, ballistic missile infrastructure, storage sites, launch complexes, the weapons capable of reaching Israeli cities in 12 minutes. The fourth category, nuclear facilities, sites connected to Iran's enrichment program, research centers, weapons development pathways. And this is where America entered the picture, because there were targets buried hundreds of feet underground that Israeli munitions alone could not reach. Only one country had the weapons to go that deep, and that country did not stay on the sidelines. But what happened next, inside Iran, in the hours immediately following the strike, is the part of this story that most people are completely unprepared for. Before we go further, You need to understand who this man actually was, because most people in the Western world think of a supreme leader the way they think of a president, a political figure, replaceable. That is not what Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was. He was not a figurehead. He was not ceremonial. He was the absolute center of gravity for the entire Islamic Republic of Iran. Every major decision flowed through him or required his personal approval. Let me be specific, because the specifics matter tonight. He controlled Iran's nuclear policy, every decision about uranium enrichment, every decision about facility construction, every decision about whether to cooperate or obstruct international weapons inspectors. All of it came from his office. He controlled the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the most powerful military and economic force in Iran, answered directly to him, not to the president, not to parliament, to him. He controlled the proxy networks, Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed groups across Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, the funding, the weapons, the strategic direction. All of it flowed through channels that ended at his desk. And critically, he personally blocked every diplomatic attempt to resolve this crisis. Reports from American officials indicate the Trump administration made repeated attempts to negotiate. Envoys were sent to Oman. Back channels were opened through Gulf intermediaries. Offers were placed on the table, and Khamenei personally refused every single one. A senior U.S. official described him, on a background call, as the last hurdle between the region and stability. The last hurdle. Now, he is gone. And here is the question every intelligence agency on Earth is trying to answer right now. Does his removal weaken Iran? Or does it create something far more dangerous? Because the Iranian system has succession mechanisms already in place. The Assembly of Experts, a body of senior clerics, is constitutionally responsible for selecting a new supreme leader. The IRGC had already prepared successors for top commanders. Khamenei himself reportedly had successors pre-identified. So this is not necessarily the end of the regime. It could be if internal fractures widen. If the Iranian people, some have already survived brutal crackdowns, see this as their moment. But it could also harden into something worse, a desperate, vengeful, IRGC-dominated successor with nothing left to lose. And here is why that matters beyond the headlines. The ancient prophecy we will examine later does not describe a weakened Iran. It describes an Iran that is part of a powerful, coordinated coalition. So ask yourself this question: does what just happened in Tehran make that coalition less likely or more? Hold that thought, because Iran's response came fast, and it was ferocious. To understand the full weight of tonight, you have to understand the system this man sat at the top of. In America, when a president dies, the vice president steps in. The government continues. The system holds. Iran does not work that way. The supreme leader in Iran's system is not a president. He is not a general. He is not a politician. He is the Vali-e-Faqih, the guardian jurist. That title carries theological weight that most Western observers completely miss. In the ideology of the Islamic Republic, the supreme leader is the earthly representative of the hidden imam. His authority is not derived from votes. It is not derived from popularity. It is derived from a theological claim that goes back over 1,000 years. And when you remove that kind of authority from a theocratic state, the consequences are not just political. They are existential. The entire legitimacy of the Islamic Republic was built on this institution. Remove it, and the regime doesn't just lose a leader. It loses its reason for existing. Now, think about what that means practically. Iran's military apparatus, the IRGC, is not just a fighting force. It controls vast portions of Iran's economy. It runs construction companies. It operates import businesses. It manages the banking sector. The IRGC is a state within a state, and right now, with the supreme leader gone, the IRGC is the most powerful entity left standing in Iran. What they decide in the next 72 hours will determine the direction of an entire nation. Will they consolidate power? Will they fracture over succession disputes? Will they launch a full retaliatory war? Or will someone inside the system quietly reach for a phone and begin a conversation with Washington? Nobody knows. And that uncertainty, that window between the old order collapsing and the new order emerging, is the most dangerous moment in this entire crisis. Because history shows us what happens when powerful military organizations lose their political anchor. They do not become peaceful. They become unpredictable. Now here is what connects all of this to something much larger. Khamenei was not just a political leader. He was the theological linchpin of a regime that has declared, repeatedly and publicly, its intention to destroy the state of Israel. That regime is now leaderless. That military is now unanchored. And there is a nation watching all of this very carefully. A nation that has supplied Iran with weapons. A nation that has stood beside Iran through every crisis. A nation that has its own designs on the region. That nation has not said a word publicly tonight, but behind closed doors, in Moscow, decisions are being made. And what those decisions lead to is written in a prophecy most people in this country have read, but never fully understood, until now. Within hours of the first Israeli strikes, Iran responded, and it was not measured. It was not proportional. It was not calculated for diplomacy. It was fury. Ballistic missiles launched toward Israel in multiple salvos, aimed directly at population centers. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, the most populated cities in the nation, targeted simultaneously, each missile carrying a 12-minute flight time from launch to impact. 12 minutes. That is the window between a launch detection alert and a potential strike on a city of millions. 12 minutes for a family to grab their children and reach a shelter. Sirens sounded across Israel throughout the day. Millions of people crowded into underground shelters. Hospitals moved patients below ground. Schools shut down. Workplaces emptied. Public gatherings banned nationwide. Israel's defense minister declared a special state of emergency across the entire country. Every layer of Israel's air defense activated simultaneously under live fire. Iron Dome intercepting short-range threats. David's sling engaging medium-range missiles. The Arrow system reaching up to intercept ballistic threats at altitude. There are 3 separate defense systems running at full capacity at the same time. But Iran did not stop at Israel. Missiles targeted American and allied military installations across the entire Persian Gulf region. Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters, came under fire. Bases in Qatar were struck. A regional diplomat confirmed 8 people injured, 1 in critical condition. The United Arab Emirates activated its air defense systems. Kuwait reported strikes on nearby facilities. The entire Gulf was under attack. Iran declared every American and Israeli interest in the region a legitimate target. And then came the statement that silenced every room where it was read aloud. Iran vowed a crushing response, using capabilities the world had not yet seen. Capabilities the world had not yet seen. Now, ask yourself what that means. Iran has ballistic missiles. The world has seen those. Iran has drone swarms. The world has seen those too. Oh, so what are the capabilities nobody has seen yet? That question is sitting on the desk of every intelligence analyst in Washington tonight. And there is one answer that keeps coming back. One capability that Iran has been developing quietly, with help from a very specific partner. A partner that has not launched a single missile tonight. A partner that is watching, waiting, and calculating. We will get to that partner. But first, you need to understand exactly how America ended up in the middle of all of this. Because Washington did not stumble into this conflict. This was planned. The United States military did not show up tonight by accident. The buildup had been underway for months. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, positioned near the Israeli coast. The USS Abraham Lincoln, already in the Arabian Sea. American destroyers deployed across the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Fighter jets prepositioned across Jordan and Gulf bases. Tanker aircraft, command and control platforms, Tomahawk missile batteries, ballistic missile interception systems. The pieces had been moving into position for weeks, quietly, deliberately, waiting for the order. And the order had a name. Operation Epic Fury. American bunker buster bombs, The largest non-nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal were deployed against targets buried hundreds of feet underground, targets that Israeli munitions alone could not reach. This is why American participation was not optional. Israel could hit the leadership. Only the United States could reach what was buried beneath it. But before the bombs, there was diplomacy. The Trump administration sent its top negotiators into the region repeatedly. Meetings in Oman, back channels through Geneva, Gulf intermediaries carrying offers between capitals. The offer was clear: negotiate on nuclear enrichment, pull back ballistic missile development, rein in the proxy networks. Iran refused every approach. And when diplomacy runs out, this administration had a doctrine ready: peace through strength, the principle that some actors only understand force. And when every peaceful option is exhausted, decisive action is not just justified, it is necessary. Now here is where this becomes critically important. There is a precedent for what comes next. While during a previous confrontation in 2025, it was President Trump personally who called off further strikes when he saw an opening for a ceasefire. One man read the moment, one man made the call, and the conflict paused. But that time, the supreme leader was alive. There was someone on the other side of the table, someone who could accept an off-ramp, someone who could order a stand-down. Tonight, that man is reportedly gone. And when there is no one at the top of a regime to accept a ceasefire, the question of what happens next becomes the most dangerous question in the world. And inside Iran right now, that question does not have an answer. Right now, inside Iran, there are three groups of people who will determine what this country becomes. The first group is the clerics, the assembly of experts, the body constitutionally responsible for selecting a new supreme leader, or trying to meet, all in a capital city that is partially in ruins, with communications disrupted, with leadership compounds destroyed, under the threat of continued airstrikes. They need to select a successor. But succession in a theocratic system is not like an election. It requires theological consensus. It requires political agreement. It requires a candidate who can claim the same divine authority that Khamenei claimed for 35 years. Finding that man in the middle of an active war in a city under attack is not a process that happens overnight. The second group is the IRGC. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is now the most powerful force left standing in Iran. And within the IRGC, there are factions, commanders who want to escalate, commanders who want to consolidate power domestically, commanders who see this crisis as their opportunity to take control of the entire state. Those factions are not unified tonight. And a divided military, with access to ballistic missiles and drone arsenals inside a leaderless theocratic state, is one of the most dangerous conditions that exists in modern geopolitics. The third group is the Iranian people. For years, they have taken to the streets, protesting corruption, protesting economic collapse, protesting the brutal crackdowns on their own daughters and sons. The regime met every protest with force. Tonight, for the first time in decades, the force is pointed the other way. What the Iranian people do in the next 72 hours could reshape this nation entirely. Do they rise? Do they wait? Do they fear what comes next more than they fear the regime? Nobody knows. But here is what we do know. Chaos inside Iran does not stay inside Iran. The proxy networks that Khamenei built and controlled, Hezbollah, armed groups across Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, are now operating without central direction. And armed groups without central direction do not become peaceful. They become reactive, unpredictable, dangerous in ways that are impossible to anticipate. The region is not stabilizing tonight, it is fracturing. And somewhere in all of this fracturing, a pattern is emerging. A pattern that was described in remarkable detail by a prophet named Ezekiel, who wrote it all down 2,600 years ago. But before we get to Ezekiel, there is something Jesus said that needs to be heard first, because it changes how you process everything you just heard. 2,000 years ago, the disciples asked Jesus a direct question. What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? His answer did not start with a single dramatic event. It started with a pattern: wars, rumors of wars, nations rising against nations, kingdoms clashing with kingdoms. And then he said something that most people skip right past. He said, all of these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. The end is not yet. Read that again. Jesus did not say these events are the end. He said they are the beginning of sorrows. That word, sorrows, in the original Greek text, is the word odin. It means birth pains. And here is what every person watching this already understands about birth pains. They do not stay the same. They escalate. Each one comes harder than the last, faster than the last, closer together than the last. And they build toward something that, once it begins, cannot be stopped. Now look at the timeline of what we have witnessed over the past 2 years. Israel and Iran exchanged direct military strikes for the first time in modern history. That was a contraction. A regional war erupts. American forces engage. A temporary ceasefire holds, barely. Another contraction, harder, faster. Today, a full-scale preemptive strike. The largest Israeli air operation in history. 200 jets, 500 targets. American bunker busters reaching underground nuclear sites. Ballistic missiles raining down on Israeli cities. The entire Persian Gulf under fire. The biggest contraction yet. Do you see the pattern Jesus described? Each escalation is larger than the one before. Each crisis arrives faster. Each conflict pulls more nations into its orbit. This is not random. This is not chaos. This is a sequence. And Jesus told us, do not be troubled, because these things must come to pass. Not might come to pass, must. That word must means this was already written, already known, already accounted for in a plan that existed before any of us were born. These events are not the end, but they are pointing towards something, and that something is described in extraordinary detail in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, written 2,600 years ago, about a coalition of nations, about a massive military assault against Israel, about a country called Persia. Persia, see the ancient name for the nation we now call Iran. And what Ezekiel says happens next is something that should make you sit forward in your seat. Ezekiel chapter 38. A prophet writing in approximately 593 BC describes a future military coalition that will rise against Israel in the last days. He names the nations involved: Persia, present-day Iran, explicitly named by a man writing 600 years before Christ. He also names a powerful nation from the far north, a nation that leads the coalition, a nation that provides the military backbone for the entire operation. Scholars have studied that geographic description for centuries. And when you draw a line due north from Israel, the nation that sits at the end of that line is Russia. Now stop, because I know what some of you are thinking. These are ancient names, ancient places. How can we connect them to modern nations? Here is how. The coalition Ezekiel describes is not built on ethnic identity. It is built on strategic alliance. A powerful nation from the north, allied with Persia, moving against Israel in the last days. Now look at what has happened over the past decade. Russia and Iran have deepened their military cooperation to a level that has no historical precedent. Russian weapons systems transferred to Iran. Iranian drone technology used on Russian battlefields. Joint military coordination across Syria. Or diplomatic cover provided by Moscow for Tehran at every critical international moment. These two nations, the northern power and Persia, are already in the early stages of the alliance Ezekiel described. And now, with Iran's leadership decimated, with the regime in chaos, with the IRGC looking for a powerful partner to help it survive, which direction does Iran turn? Toward the West that just bombed it? Or toward the one major power that has stood beside it through every crisis? The strike tonight did not end Iran's prophetic role. It may have accelerated it, because Ezekiel does not describe a strong, stable Iran leading this coalition. He describes an Iran that is drawn into it, pulled into it, by the nation from the north. The Hebrew word Ezekiel uses is the word for hooks placed in jaws, dragged forward, compelled by forces larger than its own decisions. Does that sound like a nation that has just had its entire leadership structure destroyed and is desperately searching for a powerful ally? Now, here is what Ezekiel says happens to this coalition. God himself intervenes, not through a military superpower, not through an alliance, not through a diplomatic agreement, directly. Earthquakes, confusion among the attacking forces. The coalition turns on itself, and Israel, surrounded and outnumbered, is preserved, not by its own strength, by something else entirely. Now, some people will hear all of this and feel fear. That is understandable, but here is what the prophet did not describe. He did not describe the church going through this event. He did not describe believers standing in the middle of that battlefield. And that absence is one of the most significant details in the entire passage. Because what comes before Ezekiel 38 is a question that changes everything about how you position yourself in relation to these events. And the answer to that question is not what most people expect. Here is where we are tonight. A supreme leader, reportedly dead. A regime, leaderless and fracturing. A military, unanchored and armed. A region in open war. A coalition beginning to form. And a 2600-year-old prophecy that described all of it in a sequence that is now unfolding faster than anyone predicted. The birth pains are intensifying. The contractions are coming closer together. But here is the one question that this entire night has not answered. Where does this end? Not geopolitically, prophetically. Because Ezekiel 38 is not the last chapter. It is not even close to the last chapter. What comes after the coalition forms? What comes after God intervenes? What comes after the nations of the world are forced to acknowledge what they just witnessed is described in the chapters that follow, in detail. And there is one event, one specific moment, described in those chapters that every serious student of prophecy believes comes before Ezekiel 38 even begins. An event that may be closer tonight than it has ever been before. Pay attention to the news, because the next headline may be the one that changes everything.